The following program is produced through the community television facilities of Saugus TV. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Saugus TV, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome back to another episode of Know Your Town, the next in my series of congressional candidates. As always, I am never alone on this show, partially because politics is community, and that's by definition what it is, and I like to show the human side of politicians and civic engagement and all of that, which leads me to my guest for the day, candidate for the 6th Congressional District, Mr. Dan Coe.
I'm honored to be here. I was telling you before the show started, one of my first gigs ever was Coe's Corner on the Andover Public Access TV. So it was inspiring for me, and I know you're doing a lot of great work here in Saugus, and people talk about it a lot. So you got a good buzz going, man.
So before we get into my first question,
yes, sir.
Give me a rundown of Coe's Corner, if you can remember it from back in the day.
Well, I do remember it clearly. It was just begging anyone who would be willing to come on the show to come on the show. But it was actually really great. As a result, we had the police chief come on. We had social activists come on. I will always be grateful to, at the time, Congressman Marty Meehan, because he took pity on me to be on the show. But he was phenomenal. And, you know, that's what this is all about at the end of the day, is how we cultivate communities and make sure that we have services that bring people together. Like, this show does that, and we were looking at the kitchen earlier. Yeah. The kitchen, people bringing their recipes. Your mom bringing her mac and cheese recipe. That's what people care about, and that's what they want. They want to feel like there's good community in their where they live, and that
mac and cheese recipe has kept me fed for 25 years.
You look very healthy, man. You're good, especially as a quadruplet.
Oh, please. So I'm gonna give you a spin on the most classic interview question ever asked to a politician.
Yep.
Why do you want to be a congressman for the 6th District?
For two reasons. I've been very fortunate in my life. I've worked at the White House with President Joe Biden. I've worked for Marty Walsh as his chief of staff. And I've worked as an Andover Town Select board member, as well as some time in the private sector. I've seen government work incredibly well in all those different places. And right now, we need someone who's going to take the fight to D.C., not just to Donald Trump, but to the old bureaucracy, to actually deliver for people. So when I was in the White House, for example, we capped prescription drugs for the first time. People were paying for their insulin, usually paying $300 a month. We're paying $30 a month. We raised the minimum wage for federal contractors. So if you did business for the government, you would get a minimum of $17 an hour. When I was in the city of Boston, it was about how we bring people together, businesses and workers, to make sure that we were growing the tax base in Boston so that we could have the services for things like universal pre-K.
Yeah.
I started the 311 app in Boston. So if in Boston, if you have the 311 app on your phone, if you take a picture of a pothole, not only do you get a picture of the filled pothole back, but the team that filled the pothole, so that people understand that government's about people helping people. And in the town of Andover, we did a lot of the work that some perceive as boring, but I think is the most important, which is making sure that the town was on a healthy financial path, so that hopefully, if I'm fortunate enough to have grandkids one day, that they will be in a town that isn't saddled by debt, and one that's prosperous. Right. The second reason, I got 2 German, Irish, Italian, Lebanese, Korean American kids.
I'm sorry, slow. One more time, but slower.
German, Irish, Italian, Lebanese, Korean American. They're going to be a little confused, but they'll have really good food. So maybe one day they'll show their fusion food on the Saugus TV in the kitchen. But, you know, they live the American dream. My family's lived the American dream. They come from Korea and Lebanon. My grandfather was the former ambassador to the U.S. from Korea, and then the government was overthrown, and he was exiled here. And it's only because of a thoughtful immigration policy of the United States that I even exist. And so I want my children to have a better life, like many, many parents out there want my children to have a better life than I did. The only way we do that is we take on the policies of what I believe this president is doing to hurt us, and to create that opportunity again, so that people see their costs lower and that they care and believe that their government can actually do things for them.
Right. So then let's go back. I mean, early life and education. Was there politics at the dinner table? Because I know you've got, obviously, your grandfather, but your uncle and your father were both.
My father was Commissioner of Public Health in Massachusetts, but the first job that I ever had was probably the best job I'll ever have. maybe member of Congress might be a little bit better. But it was being a narc for the Andover Police Department. They would drive me around in an unmarked vehicle to try to buy cigarettes when I was 13 years old. So they would send me in with $5. I'd ask for a pack of Marlboros specifically. If they sold, then I'd come out and the police officer would come in and cite them. And what was stunning to me is that over and over again, I'd be sold cigarettes despite the fact,
you're clearly 14 years old.
Clearly 14 years old. And the notion that the private sector will regulate itself, I just saw firsthand was not going to be the case. And if I actually wanted those cigarettes, all the studies show that a lot of these kids are getting hooked when they're 14 years old, when it's 4 years younger than they should be allowed to even buy a pack. And then for the rest of their lives, they're addicted to cigarettes. So it got me involved in public service. Then I also was one of the people who advocated for a smoking ban in restaurants. So many people know and remember that restaurants used to be smoking or non-smoking. Yep. Now it's not even thought of.
Like it made a difference and it wouldn't drift across to the other side of the restaurant?
Correct, that's right. And so many people said, oh, well, we have to have smoking in bars because that's as an American as apple pie. Now no one misses it. But back then, that was a different thing. Right. So I've seen how good, thoughtful policy has made people safer. I've seen policies that work well, talking about prescription drug prices. I've also seen Donald Trump's tariffs that thankfully were struck down today.
This morning,
that are driving prices up for Americans. We need to lower prices for Americans. We need to focus on those kitchen table issues. That's what this campaign's all about.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, and that's why I asked the kitchen table growing up. I mean, you have a condition that I have, which is ADHD.
Yep.
So when you're working in all these big offices and positions, even when you were a kid going through, was it Phillips Exeter?
Phillips Academy.
Phillips Academy.
Andover, rival school.
I feel bad now. I've
all right, don't worry,
compared UMass Amherst to UMass Lowell.
There we go. There you go.
Did your ADHD play a role? Has it made you a better public servant? Has it set you back in some ways?
Well, look, I want to say that every single person who has ADHD is different. I don't mean to impose my thing on yours.
It manifests itself differently in everyone.
And I think to society's credit, I think the stigma has lessened a bit. There's still a stigma. When I was growing up, the kid with ADHD was labeled as the kid who would never be successful. And so when I actually spent 14 years of my life trying to convince myself and my parents that I didn't have a learning difference.
Yeah.
Until finally I got tested and it was clear that I did. And I was really just scared, candidly. As you know, as a 14-year-old in school, you're concerned about how your classmates will perceive you, whether they'll see you differently. And it took a very long time for me to be outwardly articulate what I was going through.
In fact, still he talks too much.
100%. And I took Adderall, and I would be so afraid that people would judge me for it that I would go into the bathroom stall to take it because I thought that no one would ever But what I learned after I got out of school was that, I was on medication for 12 years. I'm not anymore, but just like any other condition, medication for the people who choose to do it can be very helpful.
Yep.
And B, that the skills and the mechanisms that at least I learned to understand how my mind was working in terms of attention created a superpower, I believe, in my future work that was not academically focused. And I realized that the kind of work on jumping from issue to issue, advocating for it, quickly changing gears, was something that I was uniquely qualified to do because of my ADHD. And so being a chief of staff was a very natural version of that.
Because every day is going to be 15 different things.
100%. And I think being a good member of Congress is the same way. So I see it now as a superpower. And I think there are so many parents out there, and I'm sure your mom is like this, who want only what's best for their kid. And when they hear about ADHD, they get very scared that there's not going to be a path to success. And not that I am the model of success by any means, but I am living an example that there's a lot that you can do that where ADHD becomes your superpower. And I just say to the parents, and more importantly, the kids who are young, who are wondering whether they will ever be able to compete in society because of what they're doing, that they will see it as their superpower one day. And I promise them that there's hope.
I mean, it's certainly shown up differently in law school than it did in my past because 100%. It's so different. There's so many things to read. And, I'm bored almost constantly.
That's right.
But somebody said, what's it like? I said, imagine your entire day just the way it is now, but you're actively trying to remember the lyrics to 2 different Fleetwood Mac songs at all times.
Yep.
That's what it's like.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, I was doing the questionnaire with my therapist. This wasn't too long ago. And I'm in my head, I'm going, I think I'm batting pretty good on these. You know, who knows? And then he goes, when you're in a meeting, do you have the urge to get up and pace around the back of the room?
Yep.
And I'm like, what?
Of course.
I'm like, when you're in class, do you have the urge to get up and pace around the back of the room?
Yep.
Like, are there people that don't?
Yep.
He goes, yeah, there are. I'm like, all right, that's every meeting I've ever been in my life, and I figured it would go away at some point.
Correct.
And she goes, yeah, no, you have ADHD. I'm like, all right. And, you know, like you said, medication or, you know, you find different strategies, and it's, you know, you make it work for you. In your case, you find a job that empowers that kind of thing.
And also just like, you know, and again, I don't want to speak for parents or other people with ADHD, but this kind of narrative out there that ADHD is made up disease, that medication is, you know, is not needed and stuff. It's just not true.
Right.
And it's the same for any other person who's dealt with any kind of mental health, mental difference issue. We've created a society where treatment for that seems to have a different stigma than a physical, visible ailment, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things, candidly, and again, I want to differentiate learning difference and the learning difference that I believe that I had with other forms of mental illness, of course.
Absolutely.
But when I was at the Department of Labor, one of the things we did was regulate big health insurance plans. And we were very proud to put in new policies that basically gave equal health insurance attention and treatment to mental related illnesses as that you do with a broken leg. They call it mental health parity.
Yep.
People who are dealing with schizophrenia or other mental health issues previously couldn't get the treatment that they had because the policies weren't forcing health insurers to do the right thing, which is give them the same kind of treatment.
Yeah.
We've made progress with regard to issues of the mind, but we have so much that we need to get to.
Right. I mean, couldn't agree more. So then, I know you were at the Department of Labor, but
Yep.
walk me through that. You started, say, Marty Walsh's
So
office.
I work for Tom Menino.
You work for Tom Menino.
First I was a mailroom intern for Ted Kennedy.
I read, you know what? I read that.
And,
that's funny.
And look, I don't at all mean to compare myself to Ted Kennedy, but if people are wondering what kind of politician does he want to be, you know, Ted Kennedy was as comfortable at a Little League opener and cared to be present with the personal note afterwards as he was on the floor of the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
And we need people, desperately need people, whose heart and desire is always to be at the Little League game.
Yeah.
And always be someone who gives out their cell phone number, as well as the person who is an effective legislator and communicator. And you can do both. It's not a binary choice. And so he was an inspiration. I saw that firsthand. I worked for Tom Menino, a man who was incredibly dedicated to the nuts and bolts of running a city. I went and worked for Ariana Huffington at the Huffington Post, where I learned about new media and how to break through in media environments. Then I went to work as Mayor Walsh's chief of staff in Boston for 4 years. And then, long story short, he became Secretary of Labor. I spent some time in the private sector.
Yep.
And then when he became Secretary of Labor, he asked me to come down. When you work as chief of staff of an agency, you have a lot of interaction with what's called cabinet affairs at the White House. Long story short, I joined that office after 2 years as deputy cabinet secretary. And the last year, the president needed somebody to help oversee disaster response from an intergovernmental affairs perspective, meaning mayors, governors, city councilors, making sure they have what they need, making sure that government is working for them. That was my job the last year in the Biden administration. So if you remember when the Baltimore Bridge collapsed in the middle of the night with that tanker, that was a 3 a.m. call for me, but also just a tremendous honor to be able to use the federal government in a way that was actually helping people.
So what do you think the biggest, you know, I always say Boston, North Shore, New England has its own spirit.
Yep.
What do you think the biggest thing you took with you from Boston to Washington, D.C.?
I had the best political mentor I possibly could have had in Marty Walsh. And what I mean by that is that every single phone call, voicemail, text message, stop in the middle of the street, he took very, very seriously and he cared deeply about. And I think one of the biggest failings of DC is that the people get elected and they lose touch with what happens here at home. The one thing that I know is that my DNA is that every single one of those phone calls and every single opportunity to be at an event or to knock on someone's door is the only way to do politics. Yeah. And I think both Republicans and Democrats are guilty of just drinking the Kool-Aid in D.C. and being zoned out. I spent 4 years in D.C. I live in Andover, Massachusetts. I would much rather prefer to live in Andover, Massachusetts than D.C. any day. There are plenty of people who get elected and they get obsessed with D.C. and they never look back. That won't be me.
No, you make a great point. I mean, you mentioned Ted Kennedy earlier. He's one of my favorite he probably is my favorite politician.
Yep.
That's why I asked that question at the beginning.
Sure.
But he would argue with John McCain or Orrin Hatch or, one of these other titans. They'd fight each other on the Senate floor, then they'd leave and go have lunch.
Yeah.
They weren't really fighting each other. They were fighting, for their constituents, for their passions or whatever, and then they'd leave. And I don't know how much of that you see in Washington, D.C. anymore.
You don't see it, and we need it. I will be a fighter. Let me be very clear. The first thing that we need to do is take on this president and undo all of the damage that he's done. But the way to do that, to use a poor sports analogy, is on the playing field and not on personal attacks or telling every person who voted for Trump they're a terrible person. Because I believe that there still is a playing field to have these kind of debates. And I think that there is very compelling points that we can use as Democrat. I will speak as a Democrat to win back hearts and minds. Let me give you an example. There are incredible veterans in this district. I've met many of them. I think any veteran, Republican or Democrat, would be very concerned to know that President Trump has proposed cutting 80,000 jobs from the VA. 80,000. These are people who process burn pit claims if you have cancer and you want reimbursement from the government. I think every veteran, regardless of party, should be concerned about that. I think every person who cares about cancer research and curing cancer should be concerned about the cuts that happen at the National Institutes of Health, because in the long term, that money goes to cancer research that would help make us all safe. Any single person who cares about a safer community should be concerned that there was a proposal to cut $180 million in what's called community violence intervention. Yep. Those are things that's money to use to build trust between clergy, police, kids, so that there is trust built before an incident happens. These are the things that make Saugus work well. And by the way, public broadcasting money, things that fund, things like this are all under threat under this administration. Yeah. I think there's a very compelling case to make on those items. I believe those items are purely on the playing field. Saying that, somebody on the other end of the aisle is a horrible person just because they disagree with you is against, I'm sure, what your mom taught you growing up, surely what my parents taught me when I was growing up. And candidly, both sides of the aisle, if you actually look at their behavior, is just a horrible example for our country right now.
Well, it also doesn't work. I mean, you selectmen in Andover, you can apply this anywhere. And I used to say this at UMass a lot whenever I heard a student talking in the dining hall. I'm like, all right, pump the brakes. The provost doesn't sit in his office and count your tuition money and doesn't care about anything. That is not how those people operate. You may not agree with the move the town manager made or the mayor or the city council, but I'll bet you they made it for a reason. Yep. Even in this town, town manager kind of gets harped on, I would say squirreling the money away, but it's, you could look at it that way, or Standard & Poor's says we have the highest bond rating we could have and the highest bond rating and more money in free cash than in the history of this town. So what do people do? They immediately go look for the next thing to complain about. How about we be happy with what we have for 5 minutes and then we move on to something else? But that's why I do this show, is that you may not agree with the final destination, but at least listen to the logic and understand why. Yep. Well, we had to move this money from here to here because if we took it from the operating budget, it would have affected teachers' salaries. So instead, we used this account for X, Yep. And I always find that people don't always understand the way that works. It's like, all right, you're upset that the pothole in front of your house didn't get filled.
Yep.
But the pothole in front of your house is the most important pothole in town. Let's ignore the 100 other ones in front of other people's houses.
Yep.
There's 10 guys that work for the DPW, not 1,000.
Right. And I think you touch on a point that I take very seriously, which is I think that both Republicans and Democrats underestimate the intelligence of voters. And what do I mean by that? I started a media platform when I left the government because I felt like there needed to be more people who were explaining thoughtfully what was happening, and again, on the field, arguments for, in my view, the Democratic
Decisions are made by those who show up.
100%. But I think as a result of, I don't know, polling and consultants in DC, you have these very high-level statements being made about how terrible people are, but they don't explain what's happening. What do I mean by this? I think that we need to have a robust conversation about the future of our healthcare, what exactly the costs are for people that's going to be going up or not. Democrats are infuriated, and they should be at MAGA right now for what they've done with, for example, the Affordable Care Act premiums. But we need to talk to people about what the long-term implications are of not having a plan for our healthcare, because the prices keep going up. Our government continues to have no plan to make sure that we are solvent in a certain amount of time. And candidly, most Americans are just like, I see Republicans and Democrats screaming at each other. Costs are going up at my kitchen table. I've seen nothing that's helping it. And why do I even invest anymore? We need to give people something to believe in again.
You can make the same argument for research at universities.
100%.
I mean, I realize how much money universities spend on research and how many years it might take before they get a breakthrough, and they may never get a breakthrough. But not to use the cliche, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yep.
What do you think they're doing the research for? It's, because if they find something, it could save us lives, time, money, whatever. Nobody's cured disease by looking at a wall.
Right. And it's funny because one of the biggest failings of this administration, in my opinion, is their focus on, I would argue, cheap, short-term political wins in favor of damaging, to the chagrin of damaging long-term implications.
You mean like renaming the Kennedy Center?
There's that. But then there's things like USAID.
Yes.
They can say, oh, we cut $200 million from the budget, or however much it was, billion, or whatever.
Go team.
But those countries that are reliant on that aid, it's about building those relationships with those countries, those developing countries, so that there are alliances that are seen in the future where they see America as an ally. Russia, China, and other places, nothing would make them happier, and nothing has made them happier than us abandoning our principles and abandoning aid in other countries, because they would love to fill the void to be able to build those alliances against the United States. So it's not just about, is this the right thing to do? It's about, what is it about our do you care about our economic security? Do you care about safety? And do you care about America being in pole position in the world? And if you do, then you should be very concerned about what happened at USAID. Same with all these things around cuts you're seeing in the federal government. If you are a talented person, why would you ever think about working in the federal government after what Donald Trump has done? You would be you'd be deeply concerned that whoever the next president comes in might fire you, all those kind of things. We need our best and brightest in our military. We also need our best and brightest in the federal government. We're giving people zero incentive to do that, and we should all be incredibly concerned. So
then let's pivot to that incentive, to that misunderstanding about public service, civic engagement. How do you get those people back? I mean, we'll start with, say, labor and the Democratic Party and how that's sort of shifted.
Yep.
How do you get the guy who spent his whole life working at GE, is thinking about retirement, and doesn't generally care who his, U.S. senator is, but does care who the state senator is?
Yep.
How do you get that guy to want to show up and vote?
You have to localize,
in a national election?
You have to articulate clearly the struggles that individual faces and how government, let me rephrase. You have to make sure you are communicating effectively the issues and the values that you are fighting for and how that's affecting that person's life positively.
Right.
Let me give you an example of a GE person. GE person or others in unions often have pensions because of a number of factors. Pension debt has accumulated and pension liability, has been accumulated. When I was with President Biden passed what's called the Butch-Lewis Act, which basically created $80 billion or so to help make those pensions solvent that otherwise had been insolvent. Someone who has been working 30, 40 years, done all the things right, working to earn their pension, should not be screwed out of their pension because of factors beyond their control.
Right.
That is a very tangible thing that the Biden administration did that made people's lives easier. Let me give you another example. If you work in the hospitality industry, as many people who have ever worked as a waiter or others know, that the tip pool is a very important part of the job.
Yeah.
Under President Trump, he proposed relaxing rules around tips so that the managers could take from the tip pools of servers.
Great.
Incredibly tangible stuff for people. And we worked to reverse that. We were in the Biden administration. We need to be talking with people about those things, and we need to be making sure that we are responsive to what people are stressed out about every day. Grocery prices directly related to some of the tariffs that we're seeing from Trump, right? But if we as Democrats just end up just screaming about Trump all day, or just saying, oh, he fell asleep, isn't that funny? Now look, he shouldn't have fallen asleep. But what people care more about is, what are you going to do to make my life easier?
Right.
And I worry that Democrats are not fighting hard enough to show what Democrats would do, and are just obsessed with saying what Donald Trump has done poorly. We need to be doing both at the same time.
Right. So then let's shift to the campaign here.
Yep.
What is it? 33 cities and towns?
39.
Have you got any plans you're working on, any policies, any legislation that's, say, day one, ready to go?
There's two ones, there's a lot, but there's two that come to mind.
I'm mad I got that number wrong.
First, we need to have a plan of what we are going to do the first day we win back the House. And the first thing we need to do, because when you control the House, you have subpoena power. Mm-hmm. We need to subpoena every single person who has bent the knee to this president, whether it be the law firm CEO or whether it be one of the companies that gave money for the East Wing destruction, to understand, what is this president promising that person and what are they promising back? These CEOs have tremendous influence over our society. With one change of an algorithm, they could change so much of human behavior. Yet they're giving dowries to the president and gifts and all kinds of crazy stuff in the Oval Office, and we don't know what's happening.
You mean like a giant jumbo jet that the president can take?
All kinds of stuff. That's the tip of the iceberg. So we need every one of those people in front of Congress under oath saying, what were you promised? And we need to get to the bottom of the corruption and make sure it doesn't happen again. Somewhat related, to use another poor sports analogy, we need members of Congress who understand where the puck is going and not where it is. Where the puck is going, the next frontier of, candidly, how consumers are going to get screwed is with artificial intelligence. Because the price tag that you and I know and grew up with is going away in favor of dynamic pricing based on your data. Let me give you an example. Right now, a flight, the exact same flight you and I may take somewhere, you may see a different price than I do. And there is no transparency around it. Instacart,
because the system knows you have more money than me, or because
they look at your, this is a hypothetical, but
sure.
They know you have friends in Orlando, Florida, and they know from your browsing history that you've gone there a lot. They may be willing to charge you more because they know you'll buy the ticket than I might be if I'm more willing to go to, Cape Cod or something like that. Okay. So that's happening. The other thing that's happening is that companies are testing dynamic pricing on groceries. Like Instacart just admitted that they did this. Now, to their credit, they said they ended the practice. But that would mean that if you are shopping on your Instacart app and you had eggs, your price of eggs might be different from mine. This is happening all the time. Now, again, the tech companies in this other example claim that they didn't mean it this way.
Yeah,
but there have been accusations of some of these rideshare apps charging you a different price if your battery on your phone is low, because they know you're more willing to pay a higher price because your phone's about to die, right? This is happening all over the place. And candidly, Congress is asleep at the wheel because they're either too old or unwilling to understand the technology and want to understand how to regulate it. I've been fortunate to have worked many years in the private sector at a venture-backed tech company. I know how this all works, and we need to be thoughtful about both thoughtful regulation of AI, as well as the implications and the positive impacts it could have on things like curing disease or helping people, learn more. So there's a whole world out there on this that we need to be in front of. We're way behind, and everyone should be concerned to make sure that every member of Congress they elect has their arms around this and has a plan.
Understood. So what are you hearing on the campaign trail from residents? I mean, you've been bouncing around the district for the last couple of months. You'll be bouncing around until the election.
Yep.
What has been the biggest surprises to you from these residents that maybe haven't even been to a political event before?
Well, so here's what I'm hearing most is that it's just too expensive to live and that this president's lost his mind. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who, even from Trump 1 to Trump 2, are just incredibly concerned with the fact that every single day it seems to be getting worse and that regular media is not holding them accountable and that there's no one out there fighting hard enough. They're unimpressed by what Democrats are doing, and they're also unimpressed that Democrats aren't giving another vision. So that's what I respectfully want to fight for, is being the person who has the vision and the fight to be able to take this president on. Secondly, the thing that I'm happy about and surprised, not surprised because I think that it doesn't surprise me given this district, but the thing that is reassuring, there are still so many people out there who haven't given up hope and want to believe again in their politics and in their elected officials. And I think all of us felt a gut punch. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think there are many people who felt a gut punch in November, need a little time. But I see people more fired up than ever. I have people calling me from across the country being like, I want to move to the 6th district and work on your campaign because I believe that you're going to be the fighter we need, and I want to believe in something again. We have people today. I was in our campaign office in Peabody, and we had a volunteer come in who I'd never met before in my life, who asked for 5 or 6 signatures papers because she just wants to get out there in the snow and get signatures. Like, that gives me hope that there are people, not just for my campaign, but people who are doing this for other campaigns as well. People who want to get involved in their community, who are here making Saugus TV work. There is more of that civic engagement now than I've seen in a long time, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Well, it gives me a lot of hope too. I mean, that's the basis of this show is civic engagement. You know, like I said at the beginning, we find that sometimes people don't understand how their town government works, or you know, city, state, whatever it is. And what are we here for? As you know, I'm not an elected official. I don't get paid for this. I'm a volunteer. But what are we here for if not to not just educate the public, but bring them in?
Yep.
You know, that's what politics is.
And like, what I hope is that there's a 7 or 8 year old kid who stumbles on this interview and decides, hey, I'd love to be a host on a TV show, or I'd love to run for office, and I never thought about it. And that's what this is about, right? It's about cultivating community. And that's what all government and public service should be about. How do we make sure our communities are as engaged, excited, and thriving as possible?
I mean, I'll never forget it. I had here's a personal story for you.
Sure.
It would have been 2009, maybe 2010. One of my mother's cousins decided to run for the Board of Selectmen in town. He ended up doing very well. It worked out for him. But my grandmother put out a public service announcement to the family. Scotty's running, you're all going to help him. There was no discussion. There was no... I mean, we used to climb in the back of a minivan with our, you know, the little door hangers, and with the doors open, we'd ride to a cul-de-sac or something, and all the cousins would jump out and go run to all the houses. I was 9. I think I've been working on elections in this town in some form or another ever since. Not really because I like politics, I do, but I like the people. You know, if I wasn't volunteering for friends of mine, people that cared, even when I was at UMass, you know, if I wasn't with people that were really dedicated, I'd have no interest.
Yep.
You know, I've worked over the years. I mean, even in Essex County, there are some people we mentioned before the show. Gileen Duff.
Yes.
I mean,
best.
Senator Crichton, you know, Representative Giannino, some of the other folks just that cover Saugus, the Essex County DA. These are normal, you know, down-to-earth, humble, dedicated people, and they're really what gives me hope. That they're people like that are who I do it for.
100%. And a guy like Paul Tucker, you know, he spent 30 years in the Salem police force.
Yeah.
He's seen it all. He's probably seen, candidly, the worst of domestic disputes, things like that would probably shake anybody's hope in humanity. And the fact that he, after 30 years, decided, I want to serve more, should inspire everybody. It certainly inspires me.
Well, it's like, and I don't know this person, but I will. I guess this is a name drop, but not really. You know, Secretary Walsh was a Teamster leader for a long time.
Laborers.
Sorry, laborers.
Don't worry.
When I was in high school, one of the guys I went to high school with is the son of the National Teamsters president. Now, I don't know Sean O'Brien Sr.
Sean O'Brien, yep.
But I do know his son a little bit. He's a great guy, and I just remember thinking, they're from the area. They're from, obviously they've got this strong labor background. They're both townies. So to see somebody like Secretary Walsh or Mr. O'Brien get to the national stage and still retain that identity,
Yep.
You like to see yourself in the people that represent you.
And there's something in the water about this district and Massachusetts in general with all these labor leaders. It's Marty Walsh, you mentioned Sean O'Brien, then also Eddie Kelly of the firefighters. It is so exceedingly rare to have 3 labor leaders of that prominence from a same region. Just statistically, it almost never happens. I'm fortunate that the PFFM, Massachusetts Firefighters, have endorsed our campaign, and I just admire the work that the labor movement is doing every day in tremendous headwinds, both from this president and just in general. And so it's inspiring. Marty Walsh, if you just humor me for a second. So
please, I like the personal story.
He is. There is nobody I've ever worked for in my life on anyone else that I've ever, and I adore the people I've worked for, let me be very clear. On his worst day, I would work for him over any of the people I've ever worked for, because I care deeply about leaders whose heart is in the right place. And I can't tell you how many times very important meetings that would help him personally or politically, he would delay because he was on the phone with someone that he met in Alcoholics Anonymous who was about to drink again and he wanted to help that person. Or someone who said, I'm really struggling, my mom's not getting the care she needs at a hospital and I need more help. That is what motivated him, not the fancy stuff, not the fancy, crazy DC stuff. It was about how he can help people individually. Marty Walsh gives politics a good name, and I believe deeply in people who give politics a good name.
Was never fortunate enough to meet the secretary, but
you will.
I'll have
him come by. You should have him come on the show.
That'd be fun. I always thought somebody like him, or even Senator Kennedy, would just be fascinating to sit with. But they're also the type of guys that I think would be all right to have a burger with.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of politicians that I like.
Yep. And the default should be for any elected official that if someone comes to you with a problem, the answer is never, I can't help you. It's, I may not be able to directly do this, but here's someone else who can. Being able to solve someone's problem, no matter what level it is. And I worry so much that we have politicians now in this country who don't return phone calls or think they're above the things.
Right.
One of the things I have most pride in when I was in DC was I had a person I knew whose brother was dying and their other brother was overseas and couldn't get a visa. And the only ask was for a visa for that brother to come to watch their loved one die. And they couldn't find it. They couldn't get it. And I was working in the Department of Labor. So I was able to facilitate that, and it happened. That is so critical that we have people who are willing to do those things.
Yeah.
Ted Kennedy, there's 5 billion stories about that.
And those are a lot of those are all public. A lot of them aren't public too.
A lot of them are public, and that's part of the magic, is that he never looked for it, right? In this era of social media and elected officials, people would just die to, sorry, the wrong term. People would love to just tout every single thing they do on social media.
Because it's worth the clicks.
Right, but that's just not, the true politicians are not, the true people who are in the right reasons are not looking to do that.
And I feel the exact same way. I mean, even as a student leader, this is a couple of years ago when I was in school, I used to say that to the students I was working with. I said, we can take as many victory laps as we'd like, but I'd rather do it quietly than do it publicly, because the people that need to thank us will thank us.
Yep.
I know a lot of people that like to hear themselves talk.
Yep.
But we don't need to make it about us, because in time, in theory, of course, if we did it the right way, the people that know will appreciate it, and the people that don't will be all right too.
Yep.
Yep.
And look, it's a slight tangent, but
please, we got time.
I'm very proud that when I announced my candidacy for Congress, a large swath of people in the White House who I worked with, either for or worked on my team, came out to support me very early. I pride myself in that, because as you can imagine, the White House is a very competitive,
If they didn't like you, they wouldn't be talking
a
to you.
dog-eat-dog environment, and candidly, some of the worst qualities of human, and you're seeing this in the Trump administration, candidly, come out. People upset because they're not in the room, they're not in the Oval Office when someone else is, they think someone's getting credit for it. And I did my best, and candidly, I wasn't always perfect, but I did my best to always just focus on the mission. The mission was helping as many people as possible, no matter how big or small the request was. And to your point of not seeking the appreciation and just hoping the example is there, I was incredibly heartened by the fact that so many people came out to support me early and still are, because they respected the way I led, and not because I wanted the praise, but because I believe deeply that if you're focused on the job, then the other things will come.
Yeah.
That you should not be just trying to get photo ops and all that stuff. And I if I'm fortunate enough to get elected, I will prove to the district that my goal is to be present because it's the right thing to do, and because it's the only way to proceed, and not because I want credit or photo ops.
Right. I mean, I want to turn, because that's a great answer.
Okay.
I want to turn to some lighter material.
Okay, great. I'm down.
Because we're in the last quarter here.
Yep.
You've talked about some of your proudest moments, but I mean, you're a family man. You've been around this district a long time. Give me some memories, some stories from your time, let's say in the Biden White House or in the city of Boston. Were there ever any moments where you were like, what am I doing here? I live in a cartoon.
In the White House and in the administration, that happens a lot. Candidly, it's an out-of-body experience many times. And one of the roles that I was honored to have was that President Biden, as a former county councilor, was somebody who cared deeply about individual calls to local electeds, especially in their time of need. So one of my jobs was to prepare calls to local electeds. And one time after one of the hurricanes in North Carolina, Mayor Zeb Smathers of Canton, North Carolina, a city of 5,000 people, had what he described as apocalyptic damage to his city. So we got his phone number. I had the president call him, and I was listening to him, the president, just talk to him just as a human being. And I was sitting, closer than you and I were. He's behind the Resolute desk. I'm in front of the Resolute desk for about an hour and a half making these calls. And as much as I would like to say that I was 100% focused on the task at hand, I was saying to myself, this is the president of the United States, and I'm watching him and seeing him be a human being in a way that most everyday people I talk to aren't like.
And we'll never get a chance to see.
And it was just tremendous, because the qualities that I saw in President Biden that day were the qualities that I would want in a president so badly. Just, how you doing? What can we do? How are your family? How are the people feeling? Like that kind of thing. The second thing that was also really tremendous is I'm very humbled that after the switch happened between President Biden and Vice President Harris, they asked me to help her and work on her team, and also brief her for her own disaster trip. So she went to Augusta, Georgia, as well as Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was one of the people who planned the trips. This was literally at the height of the campaign. There were probably 45 days to go, and I was briefing her, and I was mostly there.
Yeah.
But a part of me was looking at her, and I was like, "This is the most. There are 9 billion people in this world. This of 9 billion people." And we just gotten off Air Force Two, and we were in a room getting ready. And one person of 9 billion is literally across from me, inhaling this information, peppering me with questions in the best possible way. And if she had any stress about the burden that was on her shoulders, and you just can't imagine. I can't imagine what it would be like to be her.
But if she had any stress, you didn't have it. You didn't see it.
She didn't have it. She was focused on the task at hand, and she was determined, and candidly, like, kind of kicking my ass in the prep to make sure that, like, I gave her the right information, because she took the assignment so seriously. And, like, one of the things I wish people knew more about Vice President Harris was how seriously she took the assignment. And anyone who's ever worked for her will tell you that prep time with Vice President Harris can be very scary because you need to make sure you know your shit.
Yeah.
And again, I thought to myself, that's what you want in a vice president.
Right.
Someone who will leave nothing on the table and will consume as much as possible to be as prepared as
You're
possible.
a heartbeat away from the presidency.
100%.
You better act like it.
100%. And so I've learned a lot from her example, her dedication and her warmth and her comprehension. I've learned so much from President Biden's empathy, and I've learned so much from Marty Walsh's dedication to humanity. And I would like to think that the way I would want to lead if I'm fortunate enough to get elected is that combination that I think can be really powerful.
You know, and you touched on it earlier, but you know, every person, not just political figure, and this has their own, you know, demons in a sense. I mean, Secretary Walsh has been open about his
Diction. Yep.
diction. You see humanity in that too, don't you? There's that piece of taking that to elected office.
Yep.
You know, and remembering that just as much as it's worth celebrating the victories and trying to get across the finish line on so many issues, there are people that are working through their own troubles.
Yep.
And I always think Ted Kennedy and President Biden always sort of, I mean, President Biden, his loss in his life has been highly documented. I mean, he was elected to the Senate at, you know, I think 28 or something.
Yep.
And then, you know, the election's in November, he gets sworn in January.
On top of the world.
And in that few months,
His world comes crashing down.
You know, family is in this horrific car accident. He loses his wife. Both of his sons get injured. He loses his daughter too.
Yep.
Does he stick around? Nobody would have blamed him if he said, "Listen, I'm not doing this, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry."
Yep.
He keeps fighting.
Yep.
Gets up. You know, I'm not going to pretend I know anything about addiction or alcoholism or anything, but to make that look like you've got it handled and to secretly be battling that,
It's horrible.
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 You know, I want to save the last couple of minutes for what do you think your favorite moment from your time in public service was? Obviously, being in the Oval Office and, you know, sitting across from the president's got to be cool, but was there ever a time where you just completely geeked out or you were so excited to do whatever the assignment was?
I'll tell you one that immediately comes to mind, and I'll leave her last name out of it, but I had a woman named Betty. She was a senior. I believe she lived in Roxbury, Massachusetts when I was chief of staff. And she had a senior center that she would go to every day. But the ramp was broken. So when she would walk, she'd try to hold the ramp and it would wiggle, and she was unhappy with it. So Betty called she called the main line of City Hall and asked for the chief of staff. That's how I met Betty.
Betty's got some.
And so I loved it. And she called. And so it was, you know, the person who worked with me was like, Betty Harris on the line. I was like, who's Betty? And I was like, okay, Betty. And she gets on and she says, look, I got this ramp. I need your help. And so it's an example of another things, but like we were able to help get that senior center ramp fixed, and it changed her day-to-day life, you know? And I say that story because of course there was like big piece of legislation we worked on in the White House, but
that doesn't matter because
that doesn't
Betty's
matter.
still going to the senior center on Wednesday.
If Betty or another person was going to their senior center and and couldn't get up the ramp because government was failing and not keeping it up to code or what have you, you got the biggest piece of legislation on earth, but it wasn't affecting her life positively.
Right.
I want any person like Betty Harris who have concerns facing their community to feel like they can come to me and that they're going to see resolution that makes their life better. One day that could be a grocery store, groceries that are too expensive. Next day it could be a passport because they wanted to go on vacation and they forgot that their passport was expiring. The next day it could be the post office is sending their mail somewhere else, right? But especially in the context of Donald Trump People desperately need hope and belief again that there's a better way. And I've seen a better way, and I refuse to accept that this is the best we can do.
Excellent. Now, here's my final question before we get into the closing remarks. What does the 6th Congressional District mean to you? In the past, we've gotten answers about roast beef three-ways and Salem Willows and, being a kid and running around, culture, history, whatever. What does it mean to Dan Coe?
The only reason why I exist is because of this district, a district that I believe represents the best of America, and let me tell you why. My mother's side of the family came here from Beirut, Lebanon, a little village south of Beirut, Lebanon, in the 1920s. My father's side of the family, as I mentioned, came from Korea, grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. My dad was a doctor, met my mom. Of course, where we would grow up was my mom's call. In 1981, in St. Augustine's Church in Andover, Massachusetts, my parents got married. There was not another Asian American for miles and miles on end. An America that is good, that is committed to diversity, that believes in people no matter where they come from, would be an America that would allow a Korean Lebanese guy to be sitting across the
Resolute
table
desk.
from you. And a Resolute
From
desk.
me.
From us. Like the fact that I even exist. Any other country, my parents would have had intense social scrutiny, racism, and candidly, there wouldn't have even been the immigration policy to allow them both to be in the United States, their families. So the 6th District, instead of ostracizing my father, embraced him. My Lebanese grandmother and my Lebanese grandfather took my Korean dad as one of their own. A Korean guy sitting across from 2 Lebanese people eating hummus and tabbouleh as a Korean dude is frickin' America.
Yeah.
And it's only because of the spirit of this district that believes in the wide swath of immigrants all across this district as one of their own is that possible. That is the America that I think we should all be celebrating and fighting for. It's an America that this president, I do not believe, believes in. And that's why I'm fighting for this district, because that America, the one that made my life possible, is what means everything to this country. And the vision of America as only for certain people and all in the environment where prices keep going up has no place.
I mean, even if you think about the landscape demographics of this district, it's a place like Saugus and, other side of that, Gloucester, Haverhill, very different towns.
Yep.
Cities like Lynn, I think, is the biggest community in the district.
Yep.
History of not just immigrants, but blue collar. At one point, I think half of Saugus was employed by General Electric in Lynn.
Yep.
If you go up to Andover or out to Swampscott and Marblehead, you're getting quite a lot of, all right, there are the townies and my joke has always been the North Shore is just a bunch of Irish, 70-year-old Irish and Italian people arguing about whose family has been in that town, whose family has been there
exactly right.
more
Exactly.
generations, and which restaurants used to be where the current restaurants are. And you could say that to everybody, but even expand that answer to the different cultures, the different sort of passions and feelings. And I think you get a slice of America, but I don't know if you could replicate the 6th District anywhere in the world.
You couldn't. You couldn't, and even if you could demographically, you can't recreate the spirit that exists here.
Absolutely.
That at the end of the day, we're all rooting for each other, and we need to keep that spirit alive. And I refuse to accept a politics where it represents the worst of us versus the best of us.
Right. I mean, and maybe this is my inner, Jed Bartlett talking. I kind of want to ask you how close the White House is to the West Wing.
It's a lot, very simple. You can ask me all questions you want about the West Wing. That's cool.
But it's, giving people that thing to believe in, whatever that thing is for them.
Yep.
Decisions are made by those who show up.
Yep.
You know, and I always tried to tell people, you just find the issue that matters to you.
Yep.
Find a few people that agree with you, and go from there.
And there's so many opportunities, even in this cynical political environment, to get involved in your community. Right. Whether it's the work that you do, whether it's being on a planning commission, you know, as I was on the select board, planning board, school committee. Right. You know, I was talking to someone recently in a town that's on the tree committee. Like, there are ways to get involved that doesn't require you quitting your job, but will give you that little bit of hope that you can understand how government works and how best to do it. You know, I have a really amazing guy. I'll embarrass him. His name's Austin Simcoe in Andover. He was a private sector lawyer making a lot of money, could still be in there, but wanted more from his life. He wanted more of a mission. And he's given a significant amount of his career now to the town of Andover, first in the clerk's office, now chief strategy officer, assistant town manager. Getting those people who are incredibly talented involved in the town, helping the town administration, is everything. And we just need more and more people. If people are listening right now and saying, like, I feel lost, I don't think that government's working, I just encourage you, try to get involved at first just in your town or city. You'll be inspired, and there's so much more that can come from that.
And if it's not public office, you know, in addition to town officials and politicians and things, we've also had members from the Saugus Garden Club.
100%.
Members from the Lions Club. So if you're watching this in Saugus or in, you know, one of the other 38 communities, join something. Check the town website, check the city website. There's always openings on different boards. Find something that interests you, whether it's zoning board, planning board, council on aging, anything. A lot of these seats are appointed, not elected. So you don't have to be a politician, but you do have to be a passionate, involved individual. You know, if it's not policy or sort of thing you want to work on, then join a community group like the Garden Club or the Lions or the Knights of Columbus. So, you know, there's a million. But get involved in a way that works for you, because it's how the system is designed. It's designed to thrive on community.
And it only thrives if people get involved.
That's right. My favorite piece about the Bill of Rights is in the First Amendment. Not just the right to petition the government and all of that, but people almost look past the right to peaceful assembly.
Yep.
Because they assume it means protesting. And it does. But it also gives me the right to sit here 5 feet away from you and have this conversation.
Yep.
That's how you build a community. You sit and talk to each other and you listen to the other guy.
Yep.
You know, I want to give you a couple of minutes. Your camera's right there.
Yep.
Anything you want, plug anything you like.
Thank you. You know, as a dad of 2 young kids, I care deeply about our future, making sure that we have a better life for the next generation, that as all of us in this district, that we are able to live our lives how we want to do it. And in an environment right now where costs are way too high, we need someone in Congress who understands how to be effective on day one to fight against this president's negative policies, as well as lower prices for Americans. And so if you believe what I believe, that government should be about helping people, that if you want an accessible member of Congress who you can call personally, that you can email. I'll give out my cell phone number right now, 978-225-7455. Give me a call, let's talk. And if I am successful, then I guarantee that that American dream story, the one that made my life possible, the one that made all of our lives possible, will be around for generations to come. So let's go. And my website is koforcongress.com. That's KOHforcongress.com.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. Want to say to those of you watching this at home, if there's anything you want to see me cover in a future episode of this show, sctvgeneralmail@gmail.com. I'd also like to extend an invitation to any congressional candidate. Come on and do this show. Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, man.
I'm Andrew Whitcomb. He's Dan Coe. I will see you next time on Know Your Town.
The preceding program was produced through the community television facilities of Saugus TV. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Saugus TV, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.